And I, although I'm originally from the United Kingdom, I now live in the great state of Arizona, in Tucson. So I am used to heat. I can do heat. Although, as they say in Arizona, it's a dry heat. So you have a little bit of humidity down here. Okay, I'm going to go for about an hour, I think. And I'm going to cover some of the things that I'm going to cover have been touched on by some of the other presenters, and I hope that, you know, I'll go a little bit different as well. But first of all, okay, let's see if the technology works. This is back engineered from Roswell, by the way. Okay. Oh, I don't know if anyone can read that. For those who can't read that, it's somebody being abducted by aliens, and the aliens are saying, "You're smiling? This abduction isn't terrifying?" And the guy being abducted is saying, "Honestly, I'm just happy to get out of the house for a bit." So, okay, I slipped that slide in at the last moment. For those who don't know my background, I worked for the UK Ministry of Defence for 21 years, and yes, that's Ministry of Defence main building, and us Brits do spell defence with a C. So there you are. I was a civilian employee, 21 years. They move you around every few years, and from 1991 through to 1994, I was fortunate enough to be given a job where my brief was to research and investigate the UFO phenomenon and to determine whether there was evidence of any threat to the defense of the United Kingdom or anything of more general defense or scientific interest. And, ooh, black hair. That's one of the few surviving pictures of me actually working in the office from which we did all this. It's another one. Okay. I now that I've taken early retirement from the Ministry of Defence, I do a lot of film, TV work. Sometimes, as Daniel said, you know, you see me on shows like Ancient Aliens and The Basement Office, which is one of the other shows I do. But I also do some consultancy for film and TV companies. Very often, these people will want to talk to someone who's done this for the government and say, "Hey, how does it really go down? If we want to put a bit of realism in these shows, what kind of things should we put in?" So I was very fortunate to do some work on the X-Files, and that's a picture of me with David Duchovny at the UK premiere, I think, of the second X-Files movie, or whatever it was. Yeah. And we do some other fun things like this. This was, I think, to mark the release of one of the X-Files audio books with Audible. But please rest assured, no fluke men were harmed during this photo. And there, of course, is Ancient Aliens. Yay, Ancient Aliens. You know, Giorgio and David Childress and William Henry, they get sent to all the hot, exotic places, and I didn't do it. It wasn't me. Okay. They send when they want me for a field shoot, they sent me halfway up a mountain in Wales, and it was freezing. So for anyone who thinks that working in TV is all glamour and excitement and things, do we look happy in that picture? I think I think we were like, can we wrap this shoot and just get some hot coffee? And the basement office, which I don't know if any of you have, who's seen the basement office? For those of you that haven't, it's all, every episode is free. It's available on YouTube. It's put on by the New York Post. So it's on their YouTube channel, and we did 2 seasons of it. And like I say, it's all out there. It's all 100% free. It's all on YouTube. So just put in the basement office, and all the episodes will come up. Okay, I like to sometimes put this picture up just as a little bit of fun. Does anyone know what sci-fi movie this comes from? Anyone? Okay. It was a trick question. It doesn't come from any sci-fi movie. It is a real thing. And it's British. Hurrah! This is a British drone called Tyrannus, named after the Celtic god of thunder. And that is an actual photo. It's not photoshopped in any way. It's not doctored. It is just a straight photo of what this thing looks like. And the photo is freely available and was taken off the Ministry of Defense website. So I always put this up because I say to people, it's always important to remember that while there may be genuine UFOs in our skies, there are also a lot of things made by the government or by various governments all around the world. And if this sort of thing is real and flying, you know, what else is out there? Because you've got to figure that at any given time, aviation technology, depending on who you ask in terms of experts, but runs somewhere between 10, 15, 20, some would say more, years ahead of what's publicly declared. I mean, it would astound people. I think it would absolutely astound people to know how far back in time the roots, the genesis of stealth technology goes. I don't even know the exact year, but I think even the decade would shock people. So things like this are real. And yes, this is from the launch event when they rolled this thing out to the media. And isn't it totally obvious that they are playing to the meme of the spaceship in a hangar? And they're saying to people, this is real. This is another image taken from the Ministry of Defense website. The last one was a literal photo of an actual drone. This is an artist's impression. But it's an artist's impression, again, taken from the UK Ministry of Defense website. And this was an Anglo-French program called FCAV, Future Combat Air Vehicle. No pilot in it. Completely unmanned, capable of flying halfway around the world and unleashing hell upon the bad guys. There is an interesting debate going on about the extent to which human beings should or should not be in the decision-making chain when it comes to use of lethal force. And I don't have time to get into all that, but with many of these drones, and this program, by the way, was cancelled. But again, my point is, if this is the stuff they're showing you, what aren't they showing you? But for the time being, just as an interesting aside, I think, people have said, if there's no pilot in this, and if increasingly as we progress technologically, and everything is all about drones and artificial intelligence and algorithms and targeting, at what stage do we take out of the chain the thing that slows things up, i.e. human beings. Now, for the time being, the United States government, the United Kingdom government, a number of other governments have said that when it comes to things like this, there should always be a human making the final kill, don't kill decision. And for the time being, we're not going to hand this over to machines. And there are a lot of people thinking about these issues. Other countries around the world, obviously, are maybe not so constrained by legality and morality and the sense of right and justice that the United States and the United Kingdom and others believe in. But just as one other ominous aside, I should say that the United Kingdom has a network of satellites mainly for military purposes, communications, tied into every single battlefield comm system, communication network, all the nodes, and we called it Skynet. Maybe not a good idea for those that know your sci-fi franchise. Okay, let me just... we had some interesting cases. I think a couple of the speakers have alluded over the course of the evening to the Rendlesham Forest incident. This was December 1980. 2 US bases on British soil, Bentwaters and Woodbridge, something landed. This was not lights in the sky. Something landed. Something was witnessed by multiple military personnel, serving officers. This is a sketch made by one of the witnesses, Jim Peniston, who encountered this thing in a small clearing in Rendlesham Forest on the first of 3 consecutive nights of activity. This thing landed. They walked around it for a while. They took a whole load of photos, but they were subsequently told by the chain of command, "I'm sorry, your photos didn't come out." Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But Jim Peniston had the presence of mind to sketch when he'd shot off his entire roll of film, he just opened his police notebook and sketched this. And eventually the thing took off vertically, cleared the treetops and shot away at high speed. And Jim Peniston just wrote in his police notebook, "Speed impossible." Jim was trained in aircraft recognition. If there was anything in NATO or the Warsaw Pact, whether it was fixed wing, rotary wing, whatever it was, he knew. And yet this, he's like, well, this is like nothing I've ever seen before. Oh, let me just go back. Let me finish the Rendlesham story before I go on to that. One of the great things about Rendlesham was that there were 3 nights of activity, as I mentioned, and by the time the 3rd day came around, everyone was kind of in a state of panic and confusion, but there was an awards ceremony taking place, and all the senior officers, the wing commander, the base commander, the deputy base commander, they were all doing the annual awards. And suddenly the doors burst open and a young officer came up and saluted. He came up to the senior officers, saluted and said, "Sir, it's back." And they were all, "What are you talking about? What's back?" And he said, "The UFO, sir, the UFO has come back." So Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt, who I think has been here actually a couple of years ago, I believe, he was a complete skeptic, and he was becoming increasingly irritated at these UFO rumors sweeping the whole base, interfering, as he put it, with the primary mission. And he said, "I'm going to go out in the forest and I'm going to debunk all this UFO nonsense for once and for all." So he went out into the forest, and he saw the UFO himself. And thus he became one of the most senior serving military officers to see and report a UFO whilst on duty. And he went back to the landing site where this thing had come down on the first night, and one of the people he brought with him was Munro Nevels, a sergeant who was the disaster preparedness officer, and he took with him his Geiger counter, and they recorded levels of radioactivity that in the declassified government file on this incident are assessed as being, quote, significantly higher than the average background. And I'll come back to radiation and Rendlesham later, because there's a twist in the tale of this particular story. But Colonel Holt, having taken the radiation readings with Munro Nevels, then they saw the UFO himself, not landed on this third night, but in the sky, performing extraordinary speeds and maneuvers. And bear in mind, all these people are serving USAF officers. I mean, these are pretty good. No witness is infallible, but these people are pretty much as good as it gets when it comes to recording things like speeds, maneuvers, acceleration, etc. And when they say something's unusual and like nothing they've ever seen, you can take that to the bank. So Colonel Holt and the half dozen or so men that he'd taken into the forest all see the UFO. As he puts it, it was like it was performing a grid search back and forward across the sky. And at one point, it fired a narrow beam of light down and struck the ground just in front of them. And Colonel Holt, thinking back on this afterwards, asked himself, was this a weapon? Was this a warning? Was this communication? What was it? And he doesn't know. And to this day, all he will really say is, I don't know what it was, but whatever it was under intelligent control. These people choose their words carefully. This is a really interesting example, I think, of what I will call government spin and dirty tricks. In 1990, two hikers were out in Scotland, and they saw a huge diamond-shaped UFO in broad daylight, and they took 6 photos, which they sent to us at the Ministry of Defence. I had a blown-up copy of the best photo on my office wall. One day, my head of division came in, and he said, look, I don't know what these guys saw, but whatever they saw, whether it was an alien spacecraft or whether it was a secret prototype drone or aircraft, we probably shouldn't have it on the office wall, even in Ministry of Defence main building. So he took it down, locked it in his safe where the other top secret documents, top secret code word documents were kept, and it was never seen again. When the Ministry of Defence declassified and released most of its UFO files, and by the way, I'm not a whistleblower. I take my security oath very seriously, and I will not divulge classified information. The only reason I'm able to talk about this is that the British government has itself declassified and released most of the files which I wrote, and all the cases I've investigated as part of a wider declassification program. But when they declassified it, because the original photo had disappeared, this is what they released. And it's just a poor black and white photocopy of a line drawing that some intelligence community imagery analyst drew. And so this was released, and everyone said, well, I thought you said this was a really great case. That doesn't look very spectacular. Well, that was the point. That's what they wanted people to think. So, I'm not a whistleblower. But because they released this, it was legitimate for me then to say, well, okay, but I remember the original photo. It was on our office wall for 3 years. Other people remember it too. Everyone who worked in that office, everyone who ever went in and out of that office, they would come in and they would like, what the heck is that? They would look at the photo and we'd say, that's a real UFO, whatever UFOs are. So it was legitimate for me, under the terms of my security oath, to team up with a graphic artist for a TV show and say, let's take what the Ministry of Defense have released, let's combine it with my memory of that photo and some documents that were released in the case file, which also talk about it, and let's reconstruct what it really looked like. And rather like as if I was a crime victim sitting with a police artist, we spent hours on this, and suddenly he got it. And I said, that is the photo that was on our office wall, and this is what it actually looked like. And yes, that is a military jet there, and we were never, I think I'm getting into areas where I probably can't go into all of the details, but it wasn't entirely clear, shall we say, whether the military jet that was witnessed, that was photographed in the same shot, it wasn't immediately clear whether this was a military jet that was escorting this object, shadowing this object, or in some way trying to engage with this object. And that's about all I can say on that. But, you know, I put that photo up. It's been on a TV show. I don't know if the original photo will ever resurface, really. I suspect my head of division shredded it, but other people have copies too. I don't know. I don't know if the original will ever come up, but the other day, a few weeks ago, I put this on Facebook because somebody asked about it. And I'm always very careful on Facebook not to name anyone who is in or has been in the Ministry of Defense, but somebody who had worked in the same division as me, though not on the UFO program. She came onto Facebook to say, I remember that photo, and yeah, that's a really good, that is it, you've nailed it. So the great graphic artist who did this, that's not a real photo, but that photo is something that was on our office wall for 3 years on the UFO program, and every single intelligence community imagery analysis expert who looked at this, we had a unit called JARIC, which was, I think, Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center, now part of the Defense Intelligence Fusion Center. Sorry for all these acronyms, but yeah, they looked at this. They said, these are not hoax photos. This is not swamp gas, people. Project Condign. I said that there was a little twist in the tale of the Rendlesham Forest incident. This is a declassified intelligence study of the UFO phenomenon. When I was doing this job at the Ministry of Defense, my job, most of what I did was just, we had 200 or 300 cases each year. I did investigations, and we did all that on a case-by-case basis. But it was very clear to us that what we really needed to do was a proper intelligence assessment of the phenomenon itself, not just these case-by-case analyses. So Project Condign was supposed to be a full intelligence assessment, just as you would do an intelligence assessment, what do you call them here, a SNE? Is it Strategic National Intelligence Estimate, I think? Just as you would do one, say, on Russia or China or whatever you would do, like, you know, Iranian drones or North Korean ballistic missiles. We wanted to do an intelligence assessment on UFOs, and this was it. And Project Condign was its colloquial name. The final report was actually called Unidentified Aerial Phenomena in the United Kingdom Air Defence Region. We go in for long names in the British government, in the civil service, a lot of bureaucracy. And I don't have time to go into the full story of this. There were some good things in the report, but there were some missed opportunities too, I think. There was a lot of politics with this. One thing they did say, which tied in, I think, with what one of the other speakers mentioned, is they said, whatever the true nature of the UFO phenomenon, there are opportunities in terms of derivative technologies, novel military applications was the phrase that was used. Things like directed energy weapons that might result from a better understanding of what we're dealing with, whatever it is. And I know that, you know, sometimes I get invitations to go to like New Age conferences, and I think sometimes some of this talk of weaponry and threats isn't necessarily very popular, but it is what it is. You know, I make no apologies for it. I mean, it's just the way that we did it. Any military program looking at UFOs will inevitably look at it through the lens of, is there a threat here? And there's like, there's even an equation that the military used to define threat, and it's capability times intent. Capability is pretty darned impressive with some of these UFOs. What's the intent? We don't know. Therefore, we can't really say if there's a threat. So in government UFO programs, the default position is to assume there's a threat, and then if there isn't, that's great. That's better mindset than assuming it's all going to be friendly and then getting caught with your pants down if it isn't. As the old African proverb goes, talk softly but carry a big stick. I should just say something about the terminology, UAP. I think Ben mentioned this, Daniel mentioned it too, I think. We didn't invent the term UAP, but when we did this study in the 90s, one of the things we realized was that we needed to rebrand the UFO phenomenon. To get people to take it seriously in the Ministry of Defense, to get funding for intelligence assessments, we needed to get rid of the pop culture baggage. So we knew that there was the term UAP out there, so we started using it, as you can see, in this declassified study. And the original classification of this, by the way, was secret UK eyes only, so it was pretty heavy stuff. But we swapped in unidentified aerial phenomena. In June 2011, I attended a private briefing in Washington, D.C. I'd retired from the MOD by then, early retirement. But there were a number of fairly senior political figures there and intelligence community folks, and I briefed them on the British government's UFO program, and I briefed them on this intelligence assessment. And one of the things they were most interested in was this UAP business, to get people to take it more seriously. And so I did that briefing, and I didn't think much more of it. And then a few years later, after I'd moved to the US, I happened to be flipping through the channels, and I saw Jimmy Kimmel come on, interviewing Hillary Clinton. And he asked her about UFOs, and she said, no, it's not UFOs, there's a new term, and it's UAP. And I thought, hey, I did that. Okay, let's fast forward a little. A lot of the speakers have touched on this, and rightly so, because my goodness, this is the story of the century, isn't it? I mean, how many of you have seen these videos? A lot. They're everywhere. And by the way, I think this is really important, because one of the things that I say about UFOs is that in the last 3 years, this phenomenon has come out of the fringe and into the mainstream. And I don't know how many of you have ever taken any flack from friends and colleagues and family members. Like 3 years ago, maybe, it's like, you're going to a UFO festival? You're going to a UFO conference? Oh, that's just crazy stuff. Well, now, with stories like this, all of you people who've been interested in UFOs can hold your heads up high and say, hey, you know what? We weren't the crazy people. We were the people who were right. You were the people who were right all along. This story has been everywhere. New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, CNN, NBC, Fox, everything. It's been everywhere. In association with the revelations about these 3 videos, and what I think's great about these videos is that we've now got so many things coming together at the same time. We've got the pilots saying that they saw these things visually. We've got the radar operators saying that they tracked these things. And we have, as we just saw, the forward-looking infrared camera videos of these things. And we have the Department of Defense confirming that, yes, these are genuine US Navy videos. They put out a press release. It's on the DoD website. It says, to clear up the confusion, yes, these are real, and no, we don't know what they are. In association with the release of these 3 videos came the revelation that there was a program called ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. There is still debate, 3 years on, over the true nature of ATIP. The DoD and the DIA and others have occasionally tried to spin this as being, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's roughly right, a program to investigate advanced aerospace threats that might emerge in the next 30 to 40 years. In other words, they have tried to say that ATIP was about next generation aircraft, missiles and drones. But it wasn't. It wasn't. Senator Harry Reid, former Senate Majority Leader who was instrumental in setting up ATIP, said no, it was never about next generation aerospace threats. It was always a UFO program, but we kind of had to dress it up like this to get it through the system. Lou Elizondo, who ran ATIP, has said the same thing. Other people with direct personal knowledge and involvement in these programs have said the same thing. But there's even more definitive proof that ATIP was a UFO program. And why is this important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons, but after Project Blue Book was terminated at the end of December 1969, right up until this story broke about ATIP and the US Navy videos, if you had picked up the phone to the Department of Defense as a journalist and said, give me a line on UFOs, you would have been told, There is no interest in this subject and nobody is investigating. So if we now find out that there was a program looking at this, that's hugely important because it blows decades of denial out of the water. Oh, and here's something else. A lot of the ATIP work was put out into the private sector to Bigelow Aerospace, very often with highly classified programs. It gives you an extra layer of protection. It takes it further away from congressional scrutiny, and it makes it even more difficult to get at under the Freedom of Information Act, because as well as all the exemptions covering defense and national security and intelligence, you have the private sector exemptions. And this is the logo. This is the logo that the company doing a lot of the contract work on ATIP had on the side of one of their buildings and on their letterheads. Do you think someone's trying to tell you something? But I said that there was a clue that this had nothing to do with next generation aerospace threats. And the clue is in a letter that the DIA sent to Congress on January 9th, 2018. Because obviously, a whole bunch of people in Congress were just as kind of shocked as everyone else. And people in Congress were saying, hey, wait a minute, you told us no one was interested in UFOs and no one was investigating. And now we read on the front page of the New York Times that there's a program. What's going on? So the DIA wrote to Congress, and it's a tiny little letter. It just says, oh, ATIP was a program looking at next generation aerospace threats. Please see at attachment a list of studies undertaken under the ATIP program. And so in the attachment to the letter, if people had bothered to read past this kind of spin on the front page that this was all about the next generation aerospace and aviation threats, but if they'd read beyond that and looked at the titles of the studies, guess what? Anti-gravity, invisibility, stargates, warp drive, wormholes, all the advanced theoretical physics that you need for interstellar travel, nothing to do with next generation aerospace threats. How many papers do you think had anything to do with Russia or China or North Korea or Iran? The answer is 0. Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are not mentioned in the ATIP paperwork. Therefore, ATIP had nothing to do with next generation aerospace threats. But there was one piece of information that made it completely clear to those in the know that this was a UFO program. Because one of the studies, and this is not just me saying so, this is all out there, declassified, this is a DIA letter to Congress in the public domain. I mean, how many letters to Congress from the Defense Intelligence Agency have you seen talking about invisibility, anti-gravity, stargates, wormholes, and warp drive? And yet it's there. Everything you thought was science fiction, turns out someone in government is working on it right now. One of the papers was about the Drake equation. The Drake equation is a kind of thought experiment, but it has one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to estimate how many communicable civilizations there might be in our galaxy. If ATIP had anything to do with just Russia or China, Why would they need to know how many civilizations there might be in our galaxy? Come on, man. Come on. Who are you kidding? There has been huge media coverage of this. A number of my fellow speakers and I have been on a number of different shows on this. I think I've probably been interviewed by Tucker Carlson like 11 or 12 times in the last 2 or 3 years as this story has continued to unfold. And you see the caption down there: supersonic UFO stalked US aircraft carrier. These US aircraft carriers, these are billion-dollar assets. And if the position of the United States Navy is that our aircraft carriers are buzzed by these things, just in the last few days, the story broke about the Navy destroyer that was quote-unquote swarmed by these things. If the position of the US government is, we don't know what these things are, that's not good enough. It's not. It really isn't. Because if there's something in your airspace, you sure as hell want to know who it is and what they're doing. And if their capability is above and beyond your own, you should sit up and worry. And David Fravor, one of the F-18 Super Hornet pilots who encountered these things, his famous quote on this was, "I don't know what it was, but I want to fly one." Now these top guns, these elite men and women who fly these aircraft, when they get impressed by the speed, maneuverability, and acceleration of these objects, again, this just brings it home that whatever we are dealing with here is a serious defense and national security issue, whether it's friendly, whether it's hostile, whatever it is. But like I say, it's a national security issue. And that is why Congress is now finally sitting up and really paying attention to what's going on. And again, I think a couple of the other speakers mentioned, but I just want to go over what's happening right now. And by the way, everyone who was anyone in the military intelligence community is suddenly coming out with UFO stories. Did you see former CIA Director Woolsey come out with a UFO story a couple of days ago? He did. Did you see former Director of National Intelligence John Radcliffe go on to TV News a couple of weeks ago and say, yeah, it's not just 1 or 2 pilots seeing these things, it's not just, and did you notice what he slipped into the conversation? He said, it's not just 1 satellite picking these things up. Big hint there. That's hardly ever been discussed before. And a former Director of National Intelligence just drops it into an open source TV evening news show. And suddenly all these people are talking about it. Marco Rubio goes on TV and says, I would rather these things are aliens than some prototype Russian drone or Chinese aircraft, because he said if it's Russia or China, we're in big trouble. The United States would have been left standing. These things, whatever they are, these things are running rings around us. And suddenly you've got all these people, Woolsey, Radcliffe, Rubio, talking about this. A number of senators have received classified briefings on this. Rubio, Mark Warner, Jan Sheehan, a number of others, and they've come out of those briefings, and occasionally reporters have said to them, you've just had the brief on UFOs, or rather UAP, right? And they, yeah, right. Well, what's the deal? I'm sorry, it's classified. But it obviously so shook them up that they wanted more. And as you've heard, and as you may already know, the Senate Intelligence Committee, and within Congress, I mean, this is both the Senate and the House, but within Congress, the Senate Intelligence Committee seems to have taken the lead on this, but they are acting for the Armed Services Committee and others. The Senate Intelligence Committee last year requested from Director of National Intelligence an assessment of the UFO phenomenon. And they put this into the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021. Well, that act was not going to get through, and they picked an act that they knew was going to get through because this wasn't controversial. And that act was the COVID-19 Relief Bill and Omnibus Act. So a lot of people, it started some conspiracy theories because it's like, wow, UFOs, it's in the COVID bill, what's going on? Well, don't read too much into that. It was just a fairly standard piece of legislative piggybacking to get the bill through. But the COVID-19 Relief Bill was enacted on December 27th. And because the Intelligence Authorization Act was linked to it by a committee note, what was in the act is now what's going to happen. And it said, within 180 days of enactment, Director of National Intelligence, in consultation with Secretary of Defense, will supply a report on UAP. And this report, so that takes you to about June 25th. Interestingly, there are two World UFO days. One's July 2nd, Roswell, but the other one's June 24th, anniversary of Kenneth Arnold's famous flying saucer sighting. So wouldn't it be interesting if this report comes out on World UFO Day, or rather one of the two World UFO days? Some people think the report will be delayed. Some people think it might even come early. There is set up now within Office of Naval Intelligence a body called the UAP Task Force, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force. According to people with knowledge of those programs, there was a leak just before Christmas in a media outlet called Debrief. According to sources involved with some of the interim intelligence assessments, they have not ruled out the extraterrestrial hypothesis. The report has to be unclassified, but it can have a classified annex, so there's good news and bad news here. The good news is there will be something. The bad news is that all the really interesting information might be buried in this classified annex. And of course, the people doing this study, their biggest challenge is finding out who knows what within all the different parts of the US intelligence community, even just identifying what programs there are. I mean, all the different intelligence agencies, some of which may have active programs, some of which may have historical programs, all those. So the people writing this report, the biggest first step is to say, who should I even be talking to about this? It's a huge, huge challenge. And some of the people who've been involved in this and have knowledge of this and who've been briefing Congress, people like Christopher Mellon, Lou Elizondo, I think they're sounding some notes of caution and saying this could be really, really difficult. I'm coming to the end of my presentation now. I've got, I think the next slide that I'm going to show is a video. I don't know whether it's going to play or not. I'm a complete technophobe. Let's just see. If it does, this is a trailer for a video that I made about some of these recent developments. Let's see if it plays. If it does, great. If it doesn't, well, let's give it a shot. I didn't think that trailer was dramatic enough. Well, that's, let me just make a few concluding remarks now. Unfortunately, I'm the world's worst salesperson. That's my DVD, but I didn't bring any, but it's available on the internet. It was shown on, it got its UK TV premiere last week, I understand. Anyway, I just want to make a few concluding remarks. There are a lot of interesting things happening right now, some of which we've talked about, some of which are going on behind the scenes. But I guess I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts about all this. The first thought is that when it comes to skepticism about UFOs, I have a saying which I will repeat to you here, and it's this, and if anyone ever gets all skeptical and debunking with you, remember this one. The skeptics have to be right every day. The believers only need to be right once. And I think that's really worth kind of keeping hold of as a thought with this. Because it seems to me that questions such as, are we alone or not in the universe? And are we being visited? These are some of the biggest and most profound questions we can ask ourselves. And yet, I would suggest to you, we are as close as we've ever been to answering those questions. Thank you very much.
If you liked this video, be sure to check out our other content and get connected on our page and social media sites. Every day, new discoveries are being made all across the world and beyond, so let's work together to find out what's next. And remember, we won't know if we don't go. I'll see you in the Vortex.